Marcus Rodriguez crouched behind the overturned police cruiser, his weathered hands gripping the rifle that had become his constant companion for the past 3 years. The silence was deafening, too quiet for downtown Chicago, even in this new world where the dead walked among the living. Through the cracked windshield, he could see the massive horde approaching from the north, a sea of rotting flesh and gnashing teeth that stretched as far as the eye could see. This wasn't like the small groups of 10 or 20 zombies they'd been dealing with lately. This was something else entirely, something that made his blood run cold. "How many do you count?" whispered Elena Vasquez, sliding up beside him with her sniper rifle positioned perfectly against the car's hood. Her dark eyes never left the scope as she surveyed the approaching nightmare. Elena had been a sharpshooter in the National Guard before the outbreak, and her steady hands had saved their group more times than Marcus could count. But even she seemed shaken by what they were witnessing. "Too many," Marcus replied grimly, his voice barely audible. "Maybe 3,000. Maybe more." He pressed his radio's transmit button. "Base, this is Marcus. We've got a situation here. The Horde is bigger than we thought, much bigger. You need to initiate evacuation protocols now." The static-filled response came from their leader, Captain James Mitchell, whose calm voice had guided them through countless impossible situations. "Copy that, Marcus. How long do we have?" Marcus studied the shambling mass of undead creatures moving steadily toward their position. Some were recent additions to the Horde, people who had died just days ago, their flesh still somewhat intact. Others were ancient by zombie standards, their bones visible through decomposing skin, their movements jerky and unpredictable. The sight never got easier to stomach, no matter how many times he'd faced it. "Maybe 30 minutes if we're lucky," he responded, watching as the lead zombies began to notice their presence. The creatures' heads turned in unison, their milky eyes focusing on the 2 humans behind the car. "They've spotted us." Elena's finger found the trigger as she lined up her first shot. "Then we better make these 30 minutes count." The rifle cracked, and the lead zombie's head exploded in a spray of black ichor. But for every one that fell, 10 more took its place. Behind them, the sound of vehicles starting up filled the air as the evacuation began. Marcus could hear children crying, mothers calling out for their families, and the shouted orders of the other resistance members who were coordinating the desperate retreat. The community they'd built in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the city had become home to nearly 200 survivors. Men, women, and children who had somehow managed to stay alive in this hellish new world. "We need to buy them more time," Elena said, ejecting an empty magazine and smoothly inserting a fresh one. Her movements were practiced, efficient, deadly. "The families with young kids won't make it to the fallback position if we don't slow this horde down." Marcus nodded, knowing she was right. Among those families was his own. His wife Maria and their 8-year-old daughter Sophia were somewhere in that convoy of survivors racing through the tunnel system toward the secondary safe house they'd prepared for exactly this scenario. The thought of losing them drove him to fight harder, to be more reckless with his own safety. The zombies were close enough now that Marcus could smell them, the sickly sweet stench of rotting flesh mixed with something else, something that reminded him of wet earth and metal. He raised his rifle and began firing in controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. But the mathematics of the situation were brutal and unforgiving. They had limited ammunition and the horde seemed endless. "Movement on the left flank," Elena called out, swinging her rifle toward a group of zombies that had broken away from the main horde. These were the fast ones, recently infected people who retained some of their human agility and speed. They were the most dangerous, capable of running and climbing in ways that the older zombies couldn't manage. Marcus pivoted and opened fire on the runners, his bullets tearing through their torsos and limbs. But even as they fell, more kept coming. The main horde was only minutes away now, and he could feel the weight of responsibility crushing down on his shoulders. Every second they held this position was another second for the evacuees to reach safety. "This is it," he said to Elena, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "Whatever happens next, we don't let them through. Not one of them reaches that tunnel entrance." Elena's response was the crack of her rifle as she took down another zombie. "Understood. Let's show these dead bastards what the living can do." The echo of gunfire from above reverberated through the concrete tunnels as Maria Rodriguez guided her group deeper into the abandoned subway system. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the faces of terrified families clustered around her. Mothers clutching infants, fathers carrying sleeping children on their shoulders, elderly survivors leaning heavily on makeshift walking sticks. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and something else that made her stomach churn, the unmistakable scent of decay that seemed to follow them everywhere in this new world. Stay close and keep quiet, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of battle. She could hear Marcus and Elena fighting for their lives up there, buying precious time for this evacuation. Every step they took away from the tunnel entrance was another step toward safety, but it was also another step away from her husband. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on her chest like a physical burden. Behind her, 8-year-old Sofia Rodriguez walked hand in hand with Tommy Chin, a boy about her age whose parents had been lost in the last zombie attack. The children had formed their own support system in this apocalyptic world, understanding loss and fear in ways that no child should ever have to. Sofia's dark eyes were wide with fear, but she remained silent, trusting her mother completely. David Park, the group's technical specialist, moved alongside them with his tablet displaying the tunnel schematics he'd managed to download before the city's power grid failed completely. His engineering background had proven invaluable in navigating the complex underground network, but even he looked uncertain as they approached a section where his maps showed potential structural damage. The main tunnel ahead splits into 3 directions, David reported quietly to Maria. According to these old blueprints, the center path leads directly to our fallback position, but there's been water damage in that section. The left tunnel connects to the maintenance areas, and the right one goes through the old abandoned subway cars. Maria nodded, making the decision that could mean life or death for everyone following her. We take the center path. Speed is more important than. Her words were cut off by a deep, ominous rumbling that seemed to come from the very walls around them. Dust and small pieces of concrete began falling from the ceiling, and Maria's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The battle above had intensified, and the structural integrity of the tunnel was being compromised. Everyone down, David shouted, but his warning came too late. A section of the tunnel ceiling collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a wall of debris between the front half of the group and the back half. Through the dust and chaos, Maria could hear people calling out for their families, children crying, and the terrified voices of survivors who had been separated by the collapse. Mom? Sofia's voice came from the other side of the debris pile, and Maria's heart nearly stopped. Her daughter was trapped on the wrong side with about 30 other survivors, including several families with young children. I'm here, baby. Maria called back, her voice cracking with emotion. We're going to get you out of there. David was already examining the collapsed section, his flashlight revealing a wall of concrete and twisted metal that would take hours to clear, time they didn't have. The sounds of battle above were growing closer, which meant the zombie horde was advancing toward their position. The maintenance tunnels, David said urgently. It's the only way. The group on the other side will have to take the left path through the service areas while we continue on the center route. We'll meet at the fallback position. Through the debris, Maria could hear Rebecca Thompson, the former teacher who had been helping with the children, taking charge of the separated group. We'll take care of them, Rebecca's voice came through clearly. Sophia, Tommy, all of you stay close to me. We're going to take a different path, but we'll see your parents soon. Maria pressed her face against a gap in the debris, trying to see her daughter. Sophia, you listen to Miss Rebecca, okay? Mommy and Daddy will see you soon. I promise. The 8-year-old's voice was small but brave. I will, Mommy. I'll take care of Tommy too. David was already leading the remaining survivors toward the maintenance access, his tablet glowing in the darkness. The service tunnels are narrow and they haven't been maintained in years. We might encounter flooded sections, electrical hazards, or worse. But it's our only option. As they entered the cramped maintenance tunnel, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the sound of dripping water echoed ominously in the darkness. Behind them, the separated group was moving toward their own uncertain fate, and above them, the battle for humanity's survival continued to rage. Elena Vasquez's boots echoed against the metal stairs as she climbed the narrow stairwell of the old clock tower, her sniper rifle slung across her back and a heavy pack of ammunition weighing down her shoulders. Each step took her higher above the chaos of the city streets, where the zombie horde continued its relentless advance toward the tunnel entrance. Through the grimy windows, she could see Marcus still holding his position behind the overturned police cruiser, his muzzle flashes creating brief strobes of light in the growing darkness. The clock tower had been abandoned for decades, its mechanisms frozen at 11:47, a time that seemed prophetic now, as if the world itself had stopped just minutes before midnight. Elena pushed through the heavy door at the top, emerging onto the observation deck that would serve as her final stand. From this vantage point, she could see the entire battlefield spread out below her like a deadly chessboard. Marcus, this is Elena, she spoke into her radio, settling into position behind the stone parapet. I'm in the nest. You need to fall back to secondary position now. The response came through static and the distant sound of gunfire. Negative, Elena. I can hold this position longer. The evacuation isn't complete. Elena adjusted her scope, watching as Marcus continued his deadly work below. She knew him well enough to recognize the stubborn set of his shoulders, the way he hunched slightly forward when he was determined to fight to the last bullet. But she also knew the mathematics of their situation better than anyone. From her elevated position, she could see what he couldn't. More zombies were approaching from the east, a secondary wave that would soon cut off his escape route. You've got company coming from your 3 o'clock, she reported, her crosshairs finding the lead zombie in the eastern group. About 50 of them, maybe more. You need to move now. The crack of her rifle punctuated her words, and the lead zombie's head exploded in a spray of dark fluid. She worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round. The horde below began to react to the sound, some of the creatures turning their attention toward the tower, but most continued their single-minded pursuit of the living humans they could see and smell. Elena's training kicked in as she settled into the rhythm of combat. Breathe, aim, squeeze, cycle. Each shot was calculated, each bullet precious. She targeted the zombies closest to Marcus first, then the runners who were moving faster than the shambling mass, then the ones who seemed to be leading groups of others. Her years in the National Guard had taught her to read the battlefield, to identify threats and neutralize them in order of priority. Elena, you're drawing too much attention, Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. Half the horde is heading your way. She could see he was right. The zombies were beginning to cluster around the base of the tower, their rotting hands clawing at the stone walls as they searched for a way up. Some were trying to climb the fire escape, their movements clumsy but persistent. Elena knew that once they reached the stairs, her position would become untenable. That's the idea, she replied, continuing to fire methodically. Keep them focused on me while you get to the tunnel. That's an order from your superior officer. There was a pause in the radio chatter, and Elena could almost hear Marcus grinning despite the desperate situation. She had pulled rank on him, something she rarely did, but something that always worked when she needed him to listen. Copy that, Sergeant, Marcus responded, using her old military rank. Moving to fallback position now. Elena watched through her scope as Marcus began his tactical withdrawal, using the abandoned cars and debris as cover while he moved toward the tunnel entrance. She provided covering fire, picking off zombies that got too close to his position. But her ammunition was running low, and the zombies at the base of the tower were getting more aggressive. A sudden metallic clang echoed up from below. They had found the fire escape. Elena could hear them on the stairs now, their feet scraping against the metal steps as they climbed. She had maybe 5 minutes before they reached the top, maybe less. Marcus, what's your status? She called into the radio. Almost to the tunnel. Elena, you need to get out of there now. That's not a request. She looked down at her remaining ammunition, 12 rounds left. Not enough to hold off the horde indefinitely, but enough to buy the evacuation a few more precious minutes. Elena made her choice, the same choice she had made countless times before when the lives of others hung in the balance. Negative, Marcus. I'm staying put. Tell Maria and Sophia that their guardian angel is watching over them. The sound of zombies in the stairwell was getting closer, and Elena turned her attention back to the scope, ready to make every shot count. Dr. Amanda Foster's hands trembled as she stared at the radio transmission log displayed on the salvaged laptop screen. The data she had uncovered in the abandoned communication equipment told a story that made her stomach turn with revulsion and disbelief. For the past 3 weeks, someone in their group had been sending detailed information about their defenses, supply locations, and evacuation routes to the Crimson Raiders, a ruthless faction of survivors who had turned to violence and theft to sustain themselves in this apocalyptic world. The secondary safe house buzzed with nervous energy as the evacuees settled into their temporary shelter. The old subway maintenance facility had been converted into a fortress over the past year, with reinforced doors, carefully planned escape routes, and enough supplies to last a month. But Amanda's discovery meant that their enemies knew exactly where they were and how to exploit their weaknesses. The transmission started right after the Henderson family joined us, Amanda murmured to herself, scrolling through the encrypted messages. The timestamps showed a clear pattern. Each message had been sent during the night shift, when only a few people were awake to monitor the perimeter. The information was detailed and accurate, describing everything from the location of their medical supplies to the shifts of their guards. Captain James Mitchell entered the makeshift medical station where Amanda worked, his weathered face showing the strain of coordinating the evacuation. "How are the wounded?" he asked, gesturing toward the 3 survivors who had been injured during the tunnel collapse. "They'll live," Amanda replied, but her voice carried a tension that made Mitchell stop and study her more carefully. "James, we need to talk. Privately." They moved to a corner of the facility where the hum of generators would mask their conversation. Amanda showed him the laptop screen, explaining what she had discovered. Mitchell's expression grew darker with each revelation, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the implications. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The evidence is conclusive. Someone has been feeding information to the raiders for weeks. They know our defensive positions, our supply caches, even our evacuation protocols. That's why they've been able to hit our supply runs so effectively." Mitchell nodded grimly. The Crimson Raiders had been a growing threat, seeming to anticipate their every move. What had seemed like bad luck or superior scouting was actually the result of betrayal from within their own ranks. "Do we know who?" Mitchell asked. Amanda hesitated, then pointed to a specific entry in the log. "The messages are being sent from Terminal 7, that's the one assigned to Danny Harrison." Danny Harrison was a quiet man in his 30s who had joined their group 6 months ago after his previous community was overrun. He had proven himself useful as a mechanic and had volunteered for dangerous missions without complaint. The idea that he could be working with the raiders seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. "There's more," Amanda continued. "The last message was sent 2 hours ago. It contained the location of this safe house and detailed information about our current defenses. The raiders are probably already on their way." As if summoned by her words, the sound of vehicles approaching echoed through the facility. Mitchell grabbed his radio and barked orders to his security team, but Amanda could see in his eyes that he knew they were too late. The raiders had found them and they were coming with the knowledge of exactly how to breach their defenses. "Everyone to defensive positions," Mitchell shouted across the facility. "This is not a drill." The safe house erupted into controlled chaos as survivors grabbed weapons and moved to their assigned positions. Children were quickly ushered into the most secure areas while adults prepared for battle. But Amanda could see the fear in their eyes. They had just escaped one deadly situation only to find themselves trapped in another. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the headlights of approaching vehicles, their engines growling like mechanical predators. The raiders had come in force and they knew exactly where to strike. But what chilled Amanda to the bone was the realization that the zombie horde was still out there, drawn by the sounds of battle. They would be fighting on 2 fronts, against human enemies who wanted their supplies and against the undead who wanted their lives. "Where's Harrison?" Mitchell demanded, scanning the defensive positions. Amanda looked around the facility, her heart sinking as she realized the truth. "He's gone. He must have slipped out during the evacuation preparations." The sound of gunfire erupted from outside, and Amanda knew that their nightmare was just beginning. The raiders were attacking with inside knowledge of their defenses, and somewhere in the darkness beyond, the zombie horde was shambling toward the sounds of battle, drawn by the promise of fresh meat and the chaos of human conflict. The dawn light revealed the true horror of their situation as Captain James Mitchell surveyed the partially destroyed highway bridge that stretched across the churning waters of the Chicago River. The concrete structure had been damaged during the early days of the outbreak, with entire sections missing and twisted metal rebar jutting out like broken bones. But it was their only path to Roosevelt Island, where intelligence reports suggested a fortified community might still exist. Behind them, the safe house burned with black smoke rising into the gray morning sky. The battle with the Crimson Raiders had lasted through the night, costing them precious ammunition and 3 good people. Worse still, the gunfire had attracted exactly what Mitchell had feared most. The zombie horde that Marcus and Elena had been fighting was now converging on their position, drawn by the sounds of combat and the scent of spilled blood. "It doesn't look stable," David Park observed, his engineering expertise evident in the way he studied the bridge's damaged support structure. "The main span is intact but those side sections, one wrong step and the whole thing could come down." Mitchell nodded grimly. They had roughly 150 survivors left, including children, elderly and wounded. The bridge was their only escape route, but it was also potentially their tomb. How long to reinforce it? "With what we have. Maybe 6 hours if we're lucky. But we don't have 6 hours. David pointed toward the approaching horde, now visible as a dark mass moving through the ruined streets. "They'll be here in 30 minutes, maybe less." The sound of crying children mixed with the worried voices of parents as the full reality of their situation sank in. Maria Rodriguez held her daughter Sofia close, having been reunited with her after the harrowing journey through the maintenance tunnels. The relief of their reunion was tempered by the knowledge that they might not survive the next hour. "We don't have a choice," Mitchell announced to the group. "We cross now in small groups. David, you take the first team and assess the structural integrity as we go. If a section starts to fail, you signal immediately and we evacuate that area." Rebecca Thompson stepped forward, her teacher's instincts taking over. "I'll organize the children and elderly. We'll cross them first, they're the most vulnerable and will need the most help." As the first group prepared to cross, the bridge groaned ominously under even the minimal weight of a few people. David had fashioned makeshift supports from salvaged materials, but everyone could see that the structure was held together more by hope than engineering. The missing sections required dangerous leaps across gaps where the river rushed 30 feet below. "Mom, I'm scared," Sophia whispered, clinging to Maria's hand as they approached the first damaged section. "I know, baby," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But we're going to be brave, okay? Just like Daddy taught us." The crossing began with agonizing slowness. Each step had to be carefully placed, each movement calculated to avoid stressing the weakened structure. When they reached the first major gap, David had rigged a rope bridge using cables salvaged from the safe house. One by one, the survivors made their way across, parents carrying children, the strong helping the weak. Halfway across, disaster struck. The sound of groaning metal filled the air as one of the support beams began to buckle under the weight of the crossing survivors. David shouted a warning, but it was too late. A section of the bridge's eastern span collapsed with a thunderous crash, plunging into the river below and taking 3 survivors with it. "Keep moving," Mitchell shouted over the chaos. "We can't stop now." The collapse had separated the group, with about 40 survivors stranded on the city side of the bridge while the rest continued toward the island. Among those trapped were several families with young children, including Tommy Chin, who had been separated from Sophia during the evacuation. "We have to go back for them," Maria cried, but Mitchell grabbed her arm. "The bridge won't hold. If we send more people back, we'll lose everyone." The decision was made for them when the zombie horde finally reached the bridge. The undead creatures didn't understand the danger of the weakened structure. They simply saw prey on the other side and began to cross. Their combined weight was too much for the already damaged bridge, and entire sections began to collapse into the river. Those trapped on the city side made a desperate choice. Rather than wait for the zombies to reach them, they jumped into the churning waters below, hoping to swim to safety. Some made it to the island's shore, others were swept away by the current. The survivors who had made it across could only watch in horror as their friends and family members fought for their lives in the dark water. As the last section of the bridge collapsed, cutting off their escape route permanently, the survivors realized they were truly isolated now, safe for the moment, but trapped on an island with no way back to the mainland. The Roosevelt Island compound had seemed like salvation when they first arrived: thick concrete walls, watchtowers, and what appeared to be a thriving community of survivors. But as Dr. Amanda Foster examined the skeletal remains scattered throughout the facility's lower levels, a horrifying truth began to emerge. The bones showed clear-cut marks, systematic dismemberment that could only mean one thing: the previous inhabitants had resorted to cannibalism to survive. "This explains why the island seemed so well stocked," she whispered to Captain Mitchell as they stood in what had once been a makeshift dining hall. The walls were stained with something that wasn't rust, and the smell of decay lingered despite the facility being abandoned for months. They weren't just surviving, they were hunting each other. Mitchell's jaw clenched as he absorbed the implications. They had brought 130 survivors to this place, including children who were already traumatized by everything they had witnessed. The last thing they needed was to discover that their refuge had been a house of horrors. "We keep this between us for now," Mitchell decided. "The group doesn't need to know about this while we're dealing with more immediate threats." Those immediate threats were becoming increasingly apparent as the day wore on. What they had initially assumed was safety from the zombie horde was proving to be an illusion. The undead couldn't swim in the traditional sense, but they could walk along the river bottom, their decomposing bodies buoyant enough to eventually surface near the island's shores. Throughout the morning, zombies had been emerging from the water like nightmarish sea creatures, their waterlogged flesh hanging in tatters as they shambled onto the rocky beaches. Rachel Thompson had taken charge of organizing the children and elderly in the compound's central building, turning it into a makeshift school and safe area. Her teaching background made her naturally suited to keeping the younger survivors calm and occupied while the adults fortified their position. But even she couldn't hide the growing tension as more zombies appeared around the island's perimeter. "Miss Rachel, Why are there so many bad people bones down there? 8-year-old Sophia asked, having apparently overheard fragments of adult conversations despite their efforts to shield the children from the truth. Rachel knelt down to Sophia's level, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes when people are very scared and hungry they make bad choices. But that's not going to happen to us because we take care of each other, okay? Meanwhile, David Park was working frantically to reinforce the compound's defenses. The previous inhabitants had built the basic structure well, but they had focused on keeping people in rather than keeping threats out. The irony wasn't lost on him as he welded additional bars across windows and reinforced doors that had originally been designed to prevent escape. The north wall has a weak section, he reported to Mitchell. Looks like someone tried to break out rather than break in. If the zombies find that spot, they'll be able to push through. Mitchell nodded, dispatching a team to shore up the defenses. But they were working against time and dwindling resources. The ammunition they had salvaged from the safe house was running low, and they had discovered that the island's previous inhabitants had used most of the available building materials for their own grisly purposes. As evening approached, the true scope of their predicament became clear. The zombies weren't just randomly washing up on shore, they were accumulating in growing numbers, drawn by the scent of the living trapped on the island. From the watchtowers, the survivors could see dozens of undead figures stumbling through the shallow waters, their movements slow but persistent. They're coming from all directions, reported Jake Morrison, one of the few survivors who had military experience. It's like they're surrounding us. The siege began in earnest as darkness fell. The zombies reached the compound's outer walls in waves, their numbers growing with each passing hour. The survivors took turns on watch duty, using precious ammunition only when absolutely necessary. But the psychological toll was devastating. The constant moaning and clawing at their defenses created an atmosphere of terror that was especially hard on the children. Maria Rodriguez held Sophia close as they listened to the sounds of the undead trying to break through their barricades. "Remember what Daddy always says," she whispered. "We're stronger than we think and we never give up." But even Maria was beginning to doubt whether they could survive this siege. The island that had promised safety was becoming their prison, and the zombies seemed to have infinite patience. Worse still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just dealing with random undead. There was something almost coordinated about the way the zombies were positioning themselves around the island. As the night wore on and the attacks intensified, the survivors realized that their island refuge might become their tomb. The very isolation that had seemed like protection was now their greatest vulnerability, and the dark secrets of the compound's previous inhabitants served as a grim reminder of what desperate people were capable of when pushed to their limits. The alarm bell's frantic clanging shattered the pre-dawn silence as Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the radio from the north watchtower. "They've breached the perimeter. Repeat, zombies are inside the compound." The word sent a chill through every survivor in the Roosevelt Island facility, marking the beginning of what everyone knew would be their final stand. Captain Mitchell burst from the command center, his rifle already in hand as he assessed the catastrophic situation unfolding around him. The weakened section of the north wall that David Park had been working to reinforce had finally given way under the relentless pressure of hundreds of zombies. The undead poured through the breach like a dark tide, their waterlogged bodies moving with terrifying determination toward the central buildings where the survivors had taken shelter. "All defensive positions now," Mitchell barked into his radio. "Rachel, get the children to the secure room and barricade the doors. This is not a drill." In the main building, Rachel Thompson was already moving with practiced efficiency, her teacher's instincts transforming into those of a fierce protector. She gathered Sophia Rodriguez, Tommy Chin, and the other children, guiding them toward the reinforced storage room they had prepared for exactly this scenario. "Stay together and stay quiet," she whispered urgently. "No matter what you hear out there, do not open this door for anyone except your parents." Sophia's eyes were wide with terror, but she nodded bravely. "Miss Rachel, what about you? Aren't you coming with us?" Rachel squeezed the girl's hand gently. "I need to help the other grown-ups keep you safe. But I promise we're going to see you again soon." The lie came easily, sometimes hope was more important than truth. Outside, the battle erupted with devastating intensity. David Park had positioned himself on the roof of the workshop, using his engineering knowledge to rain down improvised explosives on the advancing horde. His makeshift devices, constructed from the island's old propane tanks and chemical supplies, created spectacular bursts of flame that temporarily held back sections of the zombie wave. "David, we need a path to the boats," Mitchell called out, referring to the small flotilla of vessels they had discovered hidden in the island's marina. The boats represented their only hope of escape, but reaching them meant crossing through zombie-infested territory. "Give me 2 minutes." David shouted back, pulling the pin from another improvised grenade. The explosion tore through a cluster of zombies, clearing a temporary corridor toward the water. But even as some fell, more kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Dr. Amanda Foster had transformed the medical station into a fortress, using surgical tables and equipment to barricade the entrances. She moved between wounded survivors, providing what aid she could while keeping one eye on the deteriorating situation outside. When a zombie broke through one of her improvised barriers, she didn't hesitate to defend her patients with a surgical saw, her medical training serving her well in this grisly application. The most heartbreaking moment came when Maria Rodriguez made the impossible choice to leave the secure room where her daughter was hidden. Armed with nothing but a crowbar and fierce maternal determination, she fought her way through the compound to reach the marina, knowing that someone had to prepare the boats for evacuation. "Maria, what are you doing?" Mitchell called out as he saw her running through the chaos. "Getting our children out of here," she shouted back, disappearing into the smoke and confusion. At the marina, Elena Vasquez emerged from the shadows like a guardian angel returning from the dead. Somehow she had survived the clock tower and made her way to the island, arriving just as the final assault began. Her sniper rifle had been replaced with a shotgun salvaged from the compound's armory, but her deadly accuracy remained unchanged. "Thought you could use some help," she said to Marcus Rodriguez as he appeared at the marina, having fought his way through dozens of zombies to reach the boats. "Elena, how did you—" "Never mind, just help me get these engines started," Marcus replied, relief flooding his voice at seeing his old comrade alive. As the survivors began their desperate evacuation, the island facility burned behind them. David Park's explosives had done more than clear paths. They had ignited fuel stores and ammunition caches, turning their former refuge into a blazing inferno that would hopefully trap the remaining zombies. The boats pulled away from the marina just as the main building's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and debris. Behind them, the island continued to burn while ahead lay only dark water and uncertain hope. They had survived the final assault, but at a terrible cost. Nearly half their group had been lost in the fighting, and those who remained faced an unknown future on the open water. The morning sun painted the horizon in shades of gold and crimson as the small flotilla of survivor boats approached the Michigan shoreline, their engines coughing and sputtering after the long night journey across Lake Michigan. Captain Mitchell stood at the bow of the lead vessel, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he studied the distant coastline through binoculars. After everything they had endured, the Horde, the betrayal, the bridge collapse, the island siege, he almost couldn't believe they had made it this far. Behind him, the survivors huddled together in groups, sharing blankets and what little food remained from their supplies. Sofia Rodriguez sat close to her parents, Marcus and Maria, while Tommy Chen had found comfort with Rachel Thompson, who had become like a surrogate mother to the orphan children in their group. The bonds forged through shared trauma had created new families among those who had lost everything. "There," Elena Vasquez called out, pointing toward a section of the shoreline where smoke rose from carefully controlled fires. "That's not random, those are signal fires. Someone's trying to communicate." Dr. Amanda Foster moved between the boats and the smaller dinghy they had towed behind them, checking on the wounded and ensuring everyone had survived the crossing. The loss of so many people on the island weighed heavily on all of them, but she had learned that in this new world, grief was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. The living had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep hoping. As they drew closer to shore, the true scope of what awaited them began to reveal itself. The Michigan coastline had been transformed into something that resembled a medieval fortress, with wooden palisades, watchtowers, and organized defensive positions. But unlike the desperate improvised shelters they had grown accustomed to, this settlement showed signs of long-term planning and genuine community building. "Ahoy there," came a voice across the water, amplified by a megaphone. "State your business and intentions." Mitchell cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted back, "Refugees from Chicago. We're seeking safe harbor and willing to contribute to your community." A long pause followed, during which the survivors could see figures moving along the shoreline's defensive positions. Then the voice returned, warmer this time. "Bring your boats to the main pier. We'll have a reception committee waiting for you." As their boats approached the wooden dock, the survivors were amazed by what they saw. This wasn't just another desperate group of people hiding from zombies, this was a functioning society. Children played in organized groups while adults worked at various tasks. Gardens had been planted and carefully tended. Solar panels and wind generators provided clean electricity. Most remarkably, there wasn't a single zombie in sight. David Park was the first to notice the sophisticated engineering that had gone into the community's defenses. "Look at those barriers," he said admiringly. "They're not just keeping zombies out, they're designed to channel them into kill zones." This place was built by people who understood both engineering and warfare. The reception committee was led by a woman in her 50s named Dr. Sarah Williams, who introduced herself as the community's elected leader. Her calm demeanor and organized approach reminded Mitchell of the military commanders he had served under, but there was something more, a sense of hope that he hadn't encountered in years. "Welcome to New Haven," Dr. Williams said as the survivors disembarked. "We've been monitoring radio chatter from Chicago for months, hoping some of you would make it out. You've been through hell, but you're safe now." As they were led through the community, the survivors marveled at what human ingenuity and cooperation could accomplish even in the midst of an apocalypse. There were workshops where people crafted tools and weapons, laboratories where scientists worked on understanding the zombie plague, and schools where children learned not just survival skills but literature, mathematics, and arts. "How do you keep the zombies away?" Sophia asked Dr. Williams with the directness that only children possess. Dr. Williams smiled kindly. "We've learned that zombies are attracted to certain frequencies of sound and specific scents. By controlling those factors and maintaining strong perimeters, we've created a zone where they simply don't come. It's not perfect, but it works." Rachel Thompson found herself crying, not from sadness but from relief and wonder. "You mean children can actually be children here? They can play and learn without constantly looking over their shoulders?" "That's the idea," Dr. Williams replied. "We believe that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about preserving what makes us human. Art, education, compassion, community. If we lose those things, then the zombies have already won." As the sun set on their first day in New Haven, the survivors from Chicago gathered around a communal fire, sharing their stories with their new neighbors. For the first time in years, they dared to think about the future, not just surviving until tomorrow but actually building something better. The apocalypse had taken much from them, but it had also revealed the incredible resilience and goodness that humanity was capable of when people chose to work together rather than tear each other apart. In this new world, hope had found a way to flourish once again.